It's Way Up with Angela Yee, and a friend to the show is here. She's a regular. I would say a regular now because it's been 1 year.
This is my third time on Way Up.
Yeah, Daryl Fairweather is here, chief economist at Redfin, also author. On the way.
Yes, my book is finished, but it's not going to come out probably till next year. But it is locked and loaded.
All right. Well, congratulations for that. That's a big deal.
Thank you.
Must feel good. But you are the person I always tell you this. I follow you on X. It's called X now, just to see everything that you're talking about. And I saw that recently you said somebody from Nikki Haley's team, please contact me because I want to talk about housing. What is it that you want to say to someone from her team?
I just want to know what their policy is. I feel like I've talked to Biden's team. I've talked to Elizabeth Warren's team. The Democrats, they have a plan. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but they have policies put together. And I want to hear from the other side. Like, what are your policies? I think the Republicans could bring a lot to the table. They've done a lot at the state level, but I want to hear what they're doing at the federal level.
And so what has Biden done so far? Because this is something everyone says, and by the way, from what we've been seeing, the economy is doing really well right now under Biden. They call it the Biden booming economy, but people aren't really talking about that so much. So what is their plan when it comes to housing? What's been happening?
So what's been happening, I think some of the biggest policies have come through that Inflation Reduction Act. There are climate policies that are tied to housing, like getting housing more resilient and ready for the future. Biden has done a good job at that. For the next year, I think they're going to be focusing more on making housing more affordable, increasing the supply of housing. It's going to be hard for them to do that at the federal level because it's mostly local governments who are in charge of that. So they can try to use carrots and sticks to get them to increase the supply of multifamily housing. It's going to be hard. And they're also focusing on things like the low-income housing tax credit to get more money to people who really need it to afford their rent. Yeah,
I see there is a bill right now that it's been they've been kicking this around for a while, but it's a $25,000 credit to go to first-time buyers that meet a certain requirement financially, a down payment toward Equity Act. It's still not a law, though, right? It's a bill right now?
I think that's right. I mean, there are lots of down payment assistance programs, even if that one isn't official yet. There's so many at the state level and the local level. So if you're a first-time home buyer, do your research, find out what free money you can get for your down payment.
Right. And why wouldn't you? Another thing that I see a lot of people doing is buying these tiny homes on Amazon. I see on TikTok that's been a thing. Like, I got my first home, and they're showing themselves putting it together. Do you see that as something that could be something that really helps when it comes to housing?
So there have been a lot of innovations in modular housing, kind of 3D printed homes to get the construction costs down. The problem is that the reason housing is so expensive in cities like New York or Los Angeles, San Francisco, has more to do with the land. So how are you going to afford the land to put your tiny home on? It's going to be a challenge unless you're going to be building it out in some rural area where land is really cheap.
In New York, they're doing this thing now where they give you a credit if you'll put one of those tiny homes like on your property for somebody to rent out. And people are doing it, especially if it's a family member or maybe you have kids and you're like, all right, I'm going to rent this to my daughter, and then she'll have this home that we'll place on our property.
Yeah, they're called additional dwelling units or sometimes called granny flats or mother-in-law units. You can put a home in your backyard. It could be a small studio, but they even have big ones that are 2 bedrooms. These have been really popular in Seattle. California's passed some laws to make them easier. And yeah, it's great for intergenerational living because empty nesty baby boomers own twice as many homes as millennials with kids. So one solution for that is for baby boomers to go build a house in their backyard for them to live in, have their kids live in, and they have the grandchildren there too. You have this great intergenerational living arrangement, helps with childcare. So I think that's great. I think we should have more of that.
Yeah, that is a good way to look at it when it comes to like, I need some help. Ma, come back here. Yeah. All right, bring the baby to the
to the backyard.
To the main house.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now one thing that you and I discussed, and sidebar, we do talk about things offline, was, let's just say, because right now housing is something that is a crisis, right?
For sure.
Let's say you're not married, but you're dating somebody seriously and you decide, let's get a house together. What are your thoughts about something like that, and what types of things should be put into place, or should you just not do that? So
it's weird to me that people will go to the step of buying a home together before getting married, because I view marriage as mostly an economic contract. And when you're buying a home together, you're also entering into an economic contract. So I think you should take it as seriously as if you were getting married, because if you were to break up, You need to figure out what's going to happen with the house, same way you would if you were married. So just make sure that if you're going to do that, have a contract in place, have a plan for what happens, because otherwise you don't want to be going through that when you're already hating your partner, trying to figure out what to do with the house. Yeah.
I mean, and we discussed this the other day on the show as far as how do you discuss finances early, and how early should you discuss that? One woman was on TikTok and she was saying that she met somebody on Tinder, her Tinder match, and on their first date, he basically asked her, do you rent or do you own? Mm-hmm. Is that inappropriate? And when should you have those conversations?
I mean, I wouldn't be offended if somebody asked me that, because I don't think there's anything wrong with renting. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you own, you'd be less willing to like sell that house to move in with somebody else. That might be something. But I think as soon as you are starting to plan a life together, you got to get your finances out there and get it straight, because it's going to affect everything moving forward. Can you buy a home? That depends on the credit score, how much income they have. And if you're trying to build a life together, you need to get your finances aligned. You also need to get your goals aligned, because say you get some great job offer in a different city and your partner doesn't want to move with you, how are you going to settle that? You need to figure out you know who's really the one who's going to be relied on for bringing home the money, and who is going to be more, I guess, taking the passenger seat. It doesn't have to be gendered, but just getting that set, like, how are we going to set these priorities, I think is super important.
Oh, man, these conversations that people have to have when they get together. And you just touched on something, too, that, and I noticed you also put this on your timeline, but this has been a conversation. Why do people have such a problem with renting? For some reason, it's been such a taboo, like, oh, I own my house. You're still renting? Mm-hmm. For some reason, people look down on it. But right now, it is something that as far as being a smart financial decision, renting is not the worst way to go.
I mean, if you're just running the numbers on how expensive it is to rent versus buy this year, unless you're putting down a ton of cash for your home, it's probably going to be more affordable to rent. And it gets into people's heads, because let's say you own a home and you're trying to move. A lot of people don't want to go from owning their home to renting their next home. Even maybe it would be more beneficial for them to hold on to their home, rent it out, and then rent their next home. People find it very weird to like be a landlord of one home and be a renter of another home. I think people want to be the king or queen of their own castle. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the status. Is like, I own my home, I can do what I want with it, and it's mine 100%. But if you're getting a mortgage, the bank,
you don't really own it, yeah.
Yeah, they co-own it.
They can still take it from you if you don't make your payments. I saw this conversation go viral on Twitter, too. Somebody had tweeted, my whole house is paid for, but I still have to pay these property taxes every year. So really, I don't own it. What's the point of buying a house if you still have to pay property tax? And so many people weighed in on it. Some people were like, yeah, she's right. But then there were people that tried to explain what property tax is for. So I would love for you to talk about that here, because some people feel like, man, you never really own anything if you still have to pay property tax.
The thing people need to understand is that the value of your home, it's not just what is on that piece of land. The value of your home is determined by the quality of schools, how well are the roads maintained, how safe is your neighborhood, what amenities are there, and all of those things are typically paid with property taxes. Mm-hmm. So if you actually want your home's value to go up, you would want to be contributing to better schools, better parks, all of that. So I think that we need to start understanding that even if you own your home, you still have an obligation to your community, and your community is also providing something to you, and it should be reciprocal.
Yeah, because they can, once again, if you don't pay your property taxes, take your property from you.
That's true.
But it's not supposed to be going toward nothing. Obviously, that is for everything that's being maintained.
Right, because if everybody else is chipping in for the schools and the roads and all of that, it's not fair that somebody isn't paying their property taxes and contributing their fair share.
Now, as we're thinking about the elections this year, do you think that this housing crisis is going to be something that politicians have to address as they're running for office?
I think they do have to address it. And if you look at the data, the economy is doing so well, but consumer sentiment is not matching. Like, how people feel about the economy is not matching the way the economy is from like statistics. And I think the big disconnect is that people have a hard time feeling like the economy is good if they can't personally become a homeowner. Because being a homeowner is such a part of the American dream. It's such a status symbol in America that you don't really make it unless you own a home, that people aren't going to see Biden's economy as a good one if it's one where they can't afford home ownership.
Grant Cardone, he's definitely a person who is always pushing renting. Basically, he says, what does he say? Live where you rent. and rent what you own or something like that. That's his.
Like he's separating it, like buy somewhere where it's an investment, and then where you live
like
is
rent
like
out
the
something
renting.
that you own to somebody, but where you live personally, that you should rent. Where you live. I don't know that I necessarily, and it's different for everybody. I think being a homeowner, the time that I bought was a great time. My interest rate is 3.25%, and that
You're
is
lucky.
right now.
People are jealous.
And for people listening, and I had to, I was showing somebody the difference when your interest rate is a 3.25 versus like a 6%. And it does make a huge difference as far as what you're paying monthly on a mortgage. So people have to understand why your credit matters and why having a good credit score and getting the best rate you can possibly get matters. But with that being said, interest rates, people are waiting for those to drop. And we keep hearing in 2024, those rates will go down. What are your thoughts on what's happening? I know nobody can predict it, but we can see what's going on. And you're the economist, so.
Well, the chairman of the Federal Reserve came out this week, and he was basically saying, don't hold your breath on us dropping interest rates. We're going to wait for inflation to get down and be even more consistent. We're worried about the economy growing and that driving up interest rates. So basically what that means is that if you're buying a home, don't bet on interest rates coming down this year. They've come down a little bit since November, but the chances are they're probably not going to come down all that much more, which I think takes some of the pressure off. You don't have to feel like you need to time the market so much. Just figure out what you can afford, what homes are out there. If you can afford it, great, go for it. If you can't, rent, nothing wrong with that. And, the economy is in a really interesting place. It's growing so much, which is why interest rates are high. And what that means is that if you have a job, you're probably going to have more job security. If you have some stock compensation or some investments, are probably going to do better. And you might actually end up being in a better position with more money to put towards your house next year, assuming the economy keeps doing so well.
Yeah, what I'm reading is that wages are outpacing inflation right now, which is a positive thing when it comes to the economy. And now let's also talk about commercial real estate, because that's something that has been an issue with people not going in the office the way they used to. I see that banks are now pulling back from lending for commercial properties, also. But is there a way that this can benefit when it comes to the housing crisis that we're having right now?
So commercial buildings are being converted into residential. That's happening in New York City. And it's a great thing when it works out, but it can be expensive to do, especially if there are regulations. So one big barrier is that if you have a home, an apartment building, there needs to be windows in every bedroom. There needs to be a bathroom. And a lot of these commercial office buildings, they're designed so all of the bathrooms are in the center. There's only one. The plumbing's only in the middle. And they have these huge layouts where the windows are all on the outside. So it's just really expensive to convert them to meet the regulations. If they change the regulations and kind of were more flexible about how these spaces could be used for housing, that would allow even more of that to happen. Right now, there are some projects that are great, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference to the housing market this year.
All right. And another thing that's a big issue, and I would really love for you to talk about this, is migrant housing. And so we see in New York, I walk past certain hotels that have been converted and buildings. And so some people are saying that they feel like we already have a crisis of people who are unhoused living in our neighborhood. We see that in California and San Francisco. We see it in New York and Chicago. But then there's migrant housing that they're providing for people who are coming here as they're waiting to see if they can stay in the country. So the whole thing is a cycle. But what is the connection when it comes to making sure that people who are unhoused are able to get housing, but then they're feeling away because they feel like, well, these migrants come and they get housing, but we can't even get it?
I think that the needs of the long-term unhoused population are different than the refugee population, which makes it not really a direct comparison. A lot of times long-term unhoused people, they need services. They need mental health services or rehabilitation services that refugees don't necessarily need. The refugees may be coming with families. They may have ties, and it's just a temporary housing situation until they get settled with family members elsewhere. So I think it's just two different challenges. But overall, both of these things would be better addressed if we had an abundant supply of housing. And that means all kinds of housing, everything from single residence occupancy housing, where you don't necessarily have a bathroom or a kitchen in your unit, it's more shared. Those kinds of housing units can bring down the costs and make it so that unhoused people and refugees just have more options and we're not so constrained.
I saw you speaking with Elizabeth Warren's people, too, on social media. And she's like, just build more houses. And that is that the solution?
it's not, I mean, it is a solution, but like, how do you get to that solution?
Right.
Because there are a lot
Sounds
of
simple.
barriers. Yeah. And one of the biggest barriers are just local homeowners blocking housing. If a new development goes in, people start showing up at their city halls complaining that it's going to block their view, or, it's going to bring in the wrong kind of people. You know what that means. So I think we need to create the incentives where those people don't have as much say over what housing goes in, because if you're a homeowner, you're good. And you shouldn't be blocking housing that could potentially be used for families and lower income people who really do need it. So I think we need to kind of shift the power, give more power potentially to the states or even the federal government, because it's becoming such a national problem that we do need a more broad solution instead of just leaving it up to local governments.
Alongside of that, mansion taxes. We see a lot more states are considering these mansion taxes. Like you said, if you own a home, you're good. So we shouldn't want to block other people from having the ability to have some place to sleep at night for themselves and for their families. But we see in California how much that mansion tax has been affecting homeowners and people wanting to sell their homes, and even people wanting to buy homes. So what do you think about the mansion tax, and is that something you feel like should be expanded into other states?
I'm okay with taxing housing wealth, but I think you have to design it in a way that actually leads to more housing getting built. The way the mansion tax was designed in LA was honestly pretty dumb. What it does is that it taxes you at the point of sale. So what's happening is people don't want to sell anymore. Houses that, are sitting on $3 million plots of land, they're old, they're run down, they could be sold and developed into apartment buildings now that the zoning laws have changed, but if they're getting taxed because they sell, they're not going to sell. They're just going to hold on to it for as long as they can. So I think if you're going to tax the wealth, tax it in a way that actually motivates people to build those additional dwelling units, that actually creates more housing. And one thing that could do that is taxing the land value as opposed to the property. You own that building in Detroit, right?
Yes, indeed.
So yeah. So they're proposing a land value tax there, which would mean that if you own a big apartment building, you get a benefit. You get a lower tax because you're only getting or it's only being based on the land value, not on the property. We should be giving benefits to the landowners that are actually developing housing. There's so many vacant lots in Detroit where people pay almost no taxes and they just sit on it waiting for the value to go up.
That's interesting because that building did come with a lot across the street. And so we've been so focused on the building that we're trying to figure out what are we going to do with this lot that's sitting here. But we're like, man, they about to put a big tax on this empty lot that we got, because we were thinking, can we make this for parking? Like, what is it that we can do with this? Because like I said, building on that, we might just have to sell it, because I don't think I have the funds right now as I'm working on this to try to
I know. You'll make some money on the sale, but that's what the land value tax is supposed to do. It's supposed to motivate you to either sell it or do something with it. Don't just sit on it, because that doesn't do anybody any good. So.
Right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. Now, I want to talk about your book. So let people know what your book is about, even though I know, you're done, it's early, but I'm excited. And so
I do have a Substack. So if you want a preview, you can start reading my Substack too. Hate the Game is the name of the book. You can go to hatethegame.substack.com to read like a little bit of a taste of my writing style. But the book is about how to use game theory to advance your career, to make decisions like how to buy a home, how much to offer, how to make relationship decisions. Economics can inform so much about making the right choices. And basically what it comes down to is anytime you make a decision, you got to evaluate the costs and the benefits and how does that compare to your next best option. So if you're going to buy a home, how does that compare to renting? Are you going to be making more money owning the home or renting? How is your life going to change? How do you weigh things like being close to work? How do you weigh things like being able to do what you want with the home? Just putting the pros and cons list all out there and actually putting a value to it can help you make those decisions. And if over time, if you keep making decisions that way, you're going to see the benefits just keep growing until you have the career that you want.
Daryl, do you apply this to your personal life too?
Like, I'm
even relationships, like.
Well, like I have a whole chapter in it about my marriage and how when you're single, you're playing like an individual game. You're only thinking about yourself. But when you get married, you got to start acting like a team. And that means having the same goals, the same objectives. I think people end up breaking up simply because they want different things.
Right.
You got to be in alignment. And that is game theory. That's a cooperation game.
And when you have kids, that comes before everything too.
Absolutely. Yeah, you got to put them first.
Having conversations for married couples, I know somebody who I know, she was saying that her husband would make these big purchases without consulting with her first. So he might do something like buy a whole entertainment system for the basement, like a TV and all this stuff, or at one point he even bought a new car.
Wow.
And didn't even like tell her about it or consult with her first. And that made her really angry because she's like, I'm shopping and buying my clothes in Target. And he just went and bought a new car. And I'm thinking about like the kids, the family, and he's doing things because he feels like, he can floss and do it. And sometimes when you're not aligned in those ways, that can definitely cause resentment in a relationship.
Yeah, and you just got to talk it out and figure out what exactly are the things that you care about. What are your financial goals? What are your personal goals? And sometimes it's just like the solution is, you can have this amount of money, do what you want with it. I don't need to know about it, but everything else we need to talk about. So just like putting boundaries around what are the things that are discretionary and individual for each of us versus what are the things that we really need to be in alignment about.
For you personally, like what are some of your rules when it comes to relationship and economics?
My husband and I, we're pretty much in alignment on things. I feel like we both have similar values around money and how to spend that. I think that one of the things I always try to think through is not just like what is the monetary value of a decision, but how much happiness is it going to bring to my life? I feel like I'm at a point where my time is actually the thing that I need to focus on more. So instead of, it's easy to spend money on clothes, but it's harder to make time for like things that I enjoy. So making those trade-offs and making sure that I'm not just working and not focusing on personal care, I think that's something I'm working on.
And then like you having children, I saw now they have this bill that they're proposing where children would have bank accounts from when they're born.
Yeah, the baby bonds.
Yeah,
right?
the baby bonds. What do you think about that? That seems amazing to me.
I think it's great because so many children have the benefit of growing up in a household that already has wealth. Like if they grow up in a homeowner household, by the time they're adults, their parents are going to have equity. They're going to be able to help pay for their college or give them a head start buying their next home. But the kid that grows up, say, in a renter household where their parents aren't accumulating that much wealth, maybe they're lower income, they don't have that same benefit. And if you do it in a way where it's baby bonds, where the money is invested from birth, it has time to grow, it has time to go up in value in a way that isn't really feasible when you're just giving the money directly right away. So I think it's a smart plan.
I think it's pretty amazing as far as for people, because by the time you hit, I think it's 18, and then you're like, wow, they've been investing this money since I was born.
Right.
You don't even realize what you could potentially have access to. What do you teach your kids about money?
My kids are pretty young.
But people start very young.
Yeah. I mean, I try to tell them like, not everything's free. They can't have everything they want. That's definitely something.
That's a good lesson.
Yeah. And one thing I do with my kids is I take them to Goodwill mostly when I go shopping because, you don't need to buy everything new. Like reused stuff is just as good as new stuff. So trying to show them like there are lower cost options that can bring you just as much joy as the expensive thing, I think is what I'm focusing on.
Okay. And then also like the benefit of being philanthropic and sharing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's great.
Helping family out. That's always good.
All right. And then one thing I also want to talk about, and we discussed this kind of last time when you were here, climate change and the housing crisis and how those two things are interlinked. So just for people listening, because I know it is an election year, and I think that the climate change is something that should definitely be on everybody's agenda, and there should be some sort of plan. We can't act like it doesn't exist, right? Can you talk about how those two things are intertwined?
Yeah, so if you own a home, your home's value is impacted by your climate. The weather, like homes in California, one reason they're more expensive because the weather's so nice there. Homes in Florida, the weather is nice. That's why people are moving there. But over time, the climate's going to change, and therefore the value of people's homes are going to change. Some people are going to make out well because their climate is getting better, and some people are going to be in a spot if they're constantly getting hit with natural disasters. That's already driving up insurance costs. Insurance costs in Florida have gone up like 30% in 1 year.
That's crazy.
In California, insurers are leaving. So it's already having an impact on people's housing costs through the insurance costs.
Is that because of wildfires, hurricanes,
Yeah,
flooding?
they pointed to wildfires and hurricanes. Also, the cost of rebuilding is going up because the cost of labor and construction and all of that, the cost of living has been going up. So if your home is destroyed in California, it's like say you have a $300,000 property, maybe it's on a big expensive lot, but the property costs $300,000. It's destroyed. Rebuilding it could cost twice that because you're going to have to get new materials, all of that. So that's one reason insurance costs are going up.
Ooh, well, listen, there's so many things that we have to think about, but I want to make sure that people, like we know, it is an election year. So all of these things that matter to us that we can make sure that we are holding people accountable for and making sure that these conversations are being had. I hope Nikki Haley's team reaches out to you because I would love to hear what they have to say. Does Donald Trump have a policy when it comes to...
Well, you know, he had 4 years in office, so we know what he did with housing. He did have the opportunity zones, which incentivized investment in lower income neighborhoods. I think they're still analyzing like the effects of that, but I think there's been some success there. I'd love to hear Trump talk more about policy.
Right.
But yeah.
He's got other lawsuits to deal with.
Yeah.
But you know, with the opportunity zones, when you bring that up, I know some people have said that it is difficult when you don't have the finances like that because it doesn't kick in, right? You have to hold on to the property for a certain period of time. And some people don't have the luxury to be able to do that,
Yes.
you know?
It was a very developer focused initiative. It was for investors, not for regular people necessarily.
So that really does help the developers more than it would help the average person, because everybody was like, yes, opportunity zone, if I buy in an opportunity zone. But that's maybe not just for the average person.
I think it's a little bit too early to tell, but in theory, if you give tax breaks to developers to build a bunch of apartment buildings, there'll be more apartment buildings for people to live in. I don't know if we have the evidence yet to say that it's been successful in that way, though.
All right, well, we shall wait and see, and I'll be watching your timeline to see what's going on. But Daryl Fairweather, always appreciate you for coming through. We're going to be pushing this book heavy, so I'm excited about that. And thank you so much for everything that you do when you bring attention to things on social media. I'll make sure that I'm always reposting and retweeting things, because I get a lot of my information, like I always say, from watching you.
Yeah, and you can follow me. My handle is Fairweather PhD on Instagram, TikTok, X, Twitter, or just Google Daryl Fairweather.
And she knows Daryl's a guy's name. People always, she's like, enough. Enough of that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Daryl Fairweather. We appreciate you.
Thank you.